When it comes to creating memories and sharing significant life events, the family is the focal point for commemoration and celebrations. We plan for weddings, the birth of a child, college, and even retirement. But despite the conversations we have had for these life events, we rarely talk about how we want to guide our medical care during the final phase of our lives. In today's Vital Living Forum, we will focus on why it's important to have the conversation about end-of-life care early and often, and how these conversations can help you better manage your medical care. This is the second in a two-part series that explores how patient care is evolving to a more person-centered approach. Welcome, and I'd also like to welcome our studio audience today. I'm Katie Dagenet, and let's get started. Joining us for today's show are Kate DeBartolo, Dr. Joseph Shega, and Lorraine Zima Lennon. Kate DeBartolo is a national field manager for the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and the Conversation Project. In this capacity, Kate helps support the many communities who are committed to encouraging their local residents to talk about their wishes for end-of-life care. Dr. Joseph Shega is a VITAS Regional Medical Director, and as a Regional Medical Director, Dr. Shega oversees the medical care and treatment of VITAS patients in their homes, in nursing homes, assisted living communities, personal care homes, and inpatient units in Florida and Georgia, as well as the physicians in those programs. He is board certified in geriatrics, hospice, and palliative medicine. Lorraine Zima Lennon is the Senior ER Care Coordinator at Florida Hospital's Winter Park Memorial Hospital. As an experienced registered nurse with geriatric training, Lorraine serves as a direct link between the patient and care provider regarding treatment options and any subsequent follow-up care after the patient leaves the hospital. Thank you three for joining us, and thank you to our studio audience. So let's go ahead and get started. Lorraine, what does end-of-life care look like from a patient's perspective?
Well, in the emergency room, a patient comes in. They're very vulnerable, they're afraid, there are bright lights, there are people coming at them with needles and needing lab, and there's not a lot of privacy, and it can be very frightening.
And Dr. Shega, one of the questions I know that always comes up is what are physicians mandated to do and caregivers with regards to life-saving treatment in an emergency room situation?
Yeah, I mean, really the default in the U.S. healthcare system is to do everything. So if we don't know what your wishes are, our assumption is that you want all intensive aggressive medical therapies done to prolong your life as long as possible. And that's just the way the system is now set up.
Okay. And Lorraine, so let's kind of take a look at that emergency room situation. So what is typically happening? The patient is being cared for, but what's happening with the family at that moment in the emergency room?
Well, the family may have accompanied the patient, but typically they come in via EMS on a stretcher, and then the family is frantically looking for their loved one. They're brought to the bedside, but there are nurses and doctors and x-rays all trying to work with the patient as well. And so it can be a very confusing setting. There's not a lot of seating. Sometimes we ask that they take shifts if they bring a lot of family with them, and then they may have to wait out in the reception room. So it can be, as I say, confusing and not very private.
I know this is not really the scenario that people want for their end of life. Kate, what are your thoughts on this as you listen to this and thoughts for folks who are coming into an emergency room situation at this time?
Well, as a non-clinician or as the patient or family member, I feel that this really hits home that a crisis is a really terrible time to learn what your loved one may want. And it's a really hard time to go try to find documents that might live in some filing cabinet somewhere else. So really hits home the need to have these conversations ahead of time.
And I know in addition to it being an emergent situation, it's chaotic for the family, certainly. Like you said, even just finding the patient. What happens in terms of culture, though? Because obviously in that type of situation, there's a lot going on. And then you also have to consider the cultural and wishes of families. Correct, Lorraine?
That is correct. Everyone is certified in cultural diversity at, in an emergency room setting in the hospital, and we try to respect cultural values, and but sometimes we need to get things done, and sometimes those things may be put secondary when we're trying to save a life. So.
And Kate, this type of situation is probably completely different from the reality of what people might actually be wishing for. Explain that to us, kind of how this really factors in.
I think that it's tough there's no way every single person's going to be able to have a conversation about every possible scenario of what may be their particular situation, why they're coming into the facility. And so being able to talk a bit more about what your values are and not just, if I ever get like that, pull the plug or give me the whole enchilada, that's not actually very helpful for people to understand what you would want. And being sure that you've spoken to more than one person so that a couple of people may know what your wishes are can help alleviate some of that.
And I know that we'll talk a lot about pre-planning, and it's really critical, especially Dr. Shega, when folks are dealing with other issues, whether it's the medical issue, why they're brought there, cultural issues, family dynamics. How critical is it for there to be some sort of pre-planning and discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. The reality is, 85 to 90% of people want to be at home at the end of life. That's what people say. And, doing advanced care planning, having the conversation is one of the most powerful tools to have your wishes being honored. That really in conjunction with hospice, which is really the most powerful thing we have in the healthcare system to ensure people die at home.
The key is also communicating this to the medical team. So let's talk about that a little bit. How does that take place? Dr. Shega, why don't you go ahead and start us off on that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is patients and families need to be empowered to share those documents with their providers, including physicians. And I really think it's important that they feel comfortable expressing what their loved one's wishes are, especially when they're not at a point where they can talk about it for themselves. And so when hospice is involved at the end of life, that's helpful because often people don't end up in the emergency room. Those conversations can happen at home before the emergency. But the biggest thing is to just let people know what your wishes are.
And Lorraine, in an emergency room setting, how can people go about, families make sure that they are letting the appropriate people know? How do they navigate that?
Well, there's a really good wallet-sized card that you can keep on your person at all times. Many times a patient will come to the emergency room or their family, oh, my DNR's on the refrigerator at home, and I say, that's really not going to help us here, so we're going to have to sign another DNR. The problem with that is the patient may not be awake, alert, and oriented at this time. So what we have to do is do everything. So their wishes may not be carried out the way they wanted because that piece of paper is not with them.
And so maybe looking at your wishes and the information and having it with you, just like you would have your identification with
Correct.
you. What's going through your mind, Kate, as you talk with folks, as you think about the importance of conversations and how to get those conversations started with the medical teams?
I think that it's important to think through what your wishes are first, share them with a loved one, and figure out who in your medical team is best to receive that information. So maybe going to your primary care doctor, or if there's a nurse that you really like or somebody that you feel comfortable having the conversation with, you can say, I've been thinking about some things about my own care. I'd like to make sure you know them. Is there a way to get them noted in my medical record so that maybe it could be pulled up electronically later on as well, too?
And I think this is an ideal time to mention the Conversation Project. Tell us what the Conversation Project is.
Sure. So the Conversation Project is a public engagement campaign or initiative to try to get everybody's end-of-life wishes both expressed and respected. So it was founded by the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Ellen Goodman in conjunction with IHI, and we provide a lot of tools for people to help them to prepare to have those conversations so that people and families and loved ones are having these conversations around the kitchen table and not in the ICU or emergency department.
And that's a good question. When should people begin to have these conversations? It's not an easy conversation. It's not something folks are going to really, jump at talking about. But when do you recommend that they start those conversations?
Early and often, that it is always too soon until it's too late. And so it doesn't just have to be once you've had a diagnosis or something bad is happening, but how you can have the conversation when you get married and if you have kids and maybe a diagnosis later on. But many times throughout life, as your answers may change about what it is that you want.
And Lorraine, in an emergency room setting, I imagine you've seen instances where people should have had conversations.
Well, I can tell you a really wonderful, death is never wonderful, but if a situation could have gone perfectly, this one situation did, where a woman, an independent 80-year-old, was on her way to the doctor's office driving herself. she cut off a car, was broadsided, and was bumped in her car. She actually walked away from the car, was joking with EMS, you really have to go to the ER. No, she didn't want to go to the ER, and she got in and she was joking all the way to the ER, got to the emergency room. Family was not there, and she started to say, my feet feel funny. And then a few minutes later, my knees, I can't feel my knees. And within a half an hour, she was intubated and couldn't breathe on her own. And the only thing we had was that she came from an apartment complex, and I had to call the administration office there, and they had thankfully they had a contact because she didn't have any living will or anything on her person, and was able to call the family. Within an hour they were there, and they knew, they had had the conversation, and they knew, and they kept saying like a mantra, Mother didn't want this. Mother didn't want this. We had hospice come in. We had the doctors there, the neurologists. They were all supportive. One of the doctors even got classical music on an iPhone because that's what her favorite music was. And it was just a really beautiful death, which was the way it should be. I believe death, like birth, is sacred. And we should do everything that we can to make that experience for that patient and their family.
And in that case, she was able to die with dignity and the way she had chosen.
Yes.
Because she had had those important conversations.
And it was a relief to the family as well.
Mm-hmm. Why is it when we talk about, we know the conversations are difficult to have, but Dr. Shega, why don't more people have advance directives? I mean, this is something we're hearing more and more about. What are some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, I think there's really two factors at play. One is we still live in a very death-denying society, right? I mean, you watch TV, especially medical programs, people end up getting in situations where they have cardiac events, respiratory events, and they all survive. Very few of them die. So people see it, and then they think that that's true. And if you have a life-limiting illness, that's not the reality. And so there's a disconnect between reality and what people see in the real world and then our underlying death-denying tendencies. And then on the provider side, it's hard because these conversations take time, and there's not a lot of reimbursement and time in the health system, right? People's time is shorter and shorter to do more and more with less time, and so that's an issue. And then providers also don't want to feel like they're taking away hope or making people feel bad about having these conversations. Research suggests that's not true, but people still feel sometimes bad bringing it up.
Mm-hmm. And I know one of our goals here today is obviously to educate everyone and also hopefully have them start to consider the conversations to lead to advanced directives or living wills. Kate, let's talk about your personal experience and how they've impacted you and led you to the Conversation Project.
Well, my work in the Conversation Project is through the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and doing a lot of work to help spread this to different communities. But I would share two stories of my personal experience, one being that I had this conversation with my husband after we got married, and we both sat down and thought through our answers and questions and got together. And he answered every single question as if he was 85 years old in a nursing home with Alzheimer's. And I said, that's great, but I need to know what you would want now if something unexpected happened. You're healthy now, but I need to know if you got hit by a bus on your way to work, what would you want? So we went back through the questions. And just 2 weeks ago, I was here in Central Florida having an event, and we were talking about young people and coming up with those solutions. And I got home and I found out that my best friend's husband had been hit by a bus that day and had emergency brain surgery. And so it really hit home how much this can happen to anybody at any time. And it's not just for people who are older or not just for people who are sick, but that all of us should be having these conversations. So every week I come up with a new reason why this work is so important, and I'm so glad to be working on it.
And Dr. Shega, for you, what drives you to work with folks on the hospice side and making sure that they have the right information and the right education?
It's just focusing on quality, recognizing that there's a lot we can do at the end of life to ensure people have a good, peaceful death, that they can stay in control, we can maintain their dignity, we can improve their pain and symptom management, and both for the patient and for the family. And it's also recognizing that a lot of healthcare providers struggle with it. It's something that I really like to do, and it's really important, so that's really what drives me to do it every day.
And Lorraine, I know your time working in the ER has to factor in.
That's not the beginning. The beginning was in 2000. I was on the founding committee to start the palliative care team at my hospital and worked with a wonderful group of people, and we were able to take that throughout the hospital and work with patients and their families, providing that special care at the bedside that really focuses on quality, not quantity. Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult situation, but I think we've made a lot of lives better from it.
And to that point, it's important to point out, often if you focus on quality, people actually live longer.
Yes.
And so that's one of the important sort of misperceptions that people have, is if you really focus on pain and symptom management, what people really want, you often end up prolonging life.
Well, it's time for us to take a short break. Kate, you're going to be back with us in segment 3. Dr. Shaga and Lorraine, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Shaga, let's start with you. How can folks get in touch with you and VITAS?
Yeah, the number at VITAS is 1-800-93-VITAS. That's 93-VITAS.
Very easy to remember. Lorraine, how can folks reach you?
I have a phone that I always carry with me Monday through Friday. It's 407-599-6388.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And when we return, we will talk more about the role the family dynamics play in end-of-life planning. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Vital Living Forum on encouraging end-of-life conversations. Our focus in the second segment is on the complexities involved in family decisions at end of life. I'm Katie Dagenet, and with me are Amy Engert, Reverend John Williams, and Gloria Gluskin. Amy Engert is an attorney with over 25 years' experience in medical legal matters. Before becoming an attorney, Amy practiced as an ICU nurse and then as a nurse anesthetist. After going back to school for her law degree, Amy focused on medical malpractice law. And after she became a primary caregiver to both her father-in-law and mother until they passed away, she embarked on a new venture to assist others who were dealing with similar problems and issues confronting aging, end-of-life matters, and future planning. She is a Florida Supreme Court certified family law mediator specializing in elder care mediation and shared family decision-making. She is a founding partner of Elder Care Collaboration, a company dedicated to smoothing the road to aging with dignity. Reverend John Williams is a chaplain at Orlando Health, where he provides spiritual support in the hospital environment to patients, hospital staff, and family members. Reverend Williams is also a registered mental health counselor intern. He is also a pastor for Ward Chapel AME Church in Winter Park, Florida. And Gloria Gluskin is a licensed clinical social worker with Kotler Healthcare, where she provides comprehensive behavioral health solutions for residential care communities. Gloria has also worked as a geriatric care manager and in business development at an assisted living community in Central Florida. Well, when we opened this show, we talked about what can possibly go wrong and why it's important to have the conversation so that you know a loved one's wishes at all times should something happen. In this segment, we'll look at the impact that family dynamics plays not only in end-of-life conversations, but also the care of frail elders. And Gloria, let's go ahead and start with you. What are some of the biggest challenges that families face when a family's member's health begins to fail? What are some of the biggest challenges?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the age of the person. If they're elderly, it could be a little bit more expected. People have a little bit more time to prepare, and there is an expectation that there will be some kind of a progression in health as someone gets older. With a younger person, there tends to be a tremendous more stress, more agitation because of the unexpected nature of it. But when people are under stress, some of the conflicts that have been in a family tend to exacerbate.
And Reverend Williams, you have, I'm sure, witnessed many family dynamics. What did the role that cultural beliefs factor into that and to the dynamics that you witness?
One of the things we find a lot in families today, there are very many religious factors in the family. You may have one in this religious affiliation and one in this religious affiliation, and trying to merge the two to come to an understanding of how we're going to deal with the person in time of sickness. A lot of faith comes into interaction. How far should we go? How far should we not go? And it differs from community to community. So yeah, having that conversation before you get to that point is definitely helpful. You know, how we going to deal with the crisis that come in the family.
And I know one of the things you probably also see is the role of the patient and the role that they play in the family. Amy, what do you see with regards to like the how the family unit and dynamics factor into that?
Well, let's assume that you haven't had that conversation already, and you have somebody that is elderly and frail and now declining. You have the family comes back to the family home, and a lot of times they reassume their old family roles. So unresolved conflicts, unresolved issues may come up. You may have family members that are coming now to try to help and decide how they're going to manage and care for this elderly person, whether it's end of life or, you know, that phase right before end of life. You're in a crisis, and you've got family members that come. And maybe they're coming from different places now. Some people may have a need for, you know, they're not as financially well off as they were, and so they're concerned about spending the inheritance. Somebody else may live a great distance away, and now they're nervous about how am I going to manage this care from California? My mom's in Florida. So there's all kinds of dynamics that come into it, and really having that conversation, or at least starting that conversation, kind of gets people on the same page to know what their parent might want or their loved one might want, and then working out the plan and how to accomplish that. So.
And I can imagine when someone's health is declining, that in and of itself is creating friction, right, Gloria?
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes you'll find, particularly with an older person, there might be one child that has stayed close to the family member location-wise, and one that maybe lives in 3,000 miles away. And when they come back to the family home, as Amy said, you know, the person that has done all the work can often be very resentful when somebody comes in, kind of flies in and wants to take over. So again, old sibling issues start to arise. Mother loved me best kind of things tend to arise as well. And of course, power struggles, money struggles, they're all in there, particularly when there's no plan.
And if I might add one other thing to what Gloria said, then you also get that, and we don't want to call it a role reversal, but to a certain degree, that's how people understand it. Now the parent who has been the rock, who has set the stage, made all the rules, really gave you your framework of normal and how the world works, now needs help in a way that you might have needed help as a younger child. And so there are many times where siblings are not ready to step up. They're not ready to take on that role of responsibility. And it is, you know, it is a process and a difficult thing sometimes for families to wrap their heads around. So,
but also there's a positive. Because sometimes the person who's been there, you know, and other siblings coming in, they acquiesce. They say, all right, well, you've been here the whole time. You know what mom, you know what dad wants. So we'll just step back. We're here to be supportive, to do what we can do. And sometimes you get a smooth transition. It's not always a rocket transition. Sometimes it's very smooth too.
How do these dynamics impact the patient, or in this case we're referring to as a frail elder? Reverend, how does, whether it's good or bad dynamics, how do they impact the patient?
Well, number one, nobody wants to see the family fragmented, you know, because of their illness, their sickness, financial status, whatever. They try to hold the family together. If you're already sick, you don't need that undue stress on you either. So yeah, if you're already sick and you're the elderly one, yeah, you might be pushing them a little bit too over the edge. All right, so yeah, it can really be detrimental. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad to see.
And even more reason to have conversations before you get into the very emotional, volatile situations such as that.
well, sometimes you can head off those perceived conflicts. I mean, you can start to recognize them, and before somebody gets to the point where they're frail or they need care, or, you know, there's a crisis that presents itself, if you can have that conversation when that person is strong and able to verbalize and state what their wishes are, and really come up with a plan, whether it's financial, whether it's how are we going to deal with this from a distance, or set up those safety nets for them along the way, you can head off some of those conflicts before they even arise. And that really is probably one of the biggest reasons to start that conversation. And I think for people to think that it's one conversation is a mistake. It's going to be many conversations.
At what point does a family member usually step in and dictate what the patient's wishes are? If there isn't already a plan, where do you see that family members will step in and say, I've got this, this is what we should do?
Well, for what I've seen is that sometimes it is already a designated family member who's been kind of the decision maker. They may also be the power of attorney if they already have their legal documents. Maybe they're the one that are locally close. And in a healthy family, as the Reverend said, a healthy family will recognize that and let that person remain a leader. In other situations, then people say, no, I'm going to come in and I'm going to be the hero and I'm going to save the day. But for the most part, and I think it is sort of with any elderly person when there might be multiple siblings, somebody seems to kind of emerge as the family decision maker and assistant.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about an emergency situation too. That's usually when you find that crisis, because they hadn't thought about it. Nobody planned on dying, so you find yourself in the throes of death, or somebody's in a car accident. Now they got the prognosis, the person got a brain bleed. We don't know what's going to happen, and now somebody got to make a decision. Well, who's going to step up? It's usually the one who's been the closest, or usually in some families, it's a hierarchical system. Well, you the oldest. Well, sometimes the oldest don't want it. It's a hard decision to make. So, but usually it's right there when you come into the grips of the crisis of life.
Let me ask you this, Amy. How can a patient's wishes still be respected if there isn't a plan and you have family members that are coming in and trying to dictate what should happen?
I think if there has been some conversation, and I'm a firm believer as a mediator, I believe that everybody should be made aware of, not just one person. And I think that's kind of where some problems arise, as a mom or a dad or an uncle or whoever, and an elderly person will communicate to a single person that I want you to take care of me, I want you to be my voice, without telling everybody, afraid that they're going to hurt everybody's feelings. But what I have found in my practice, and really in the families that I've interacted with, if you don't have the formal documents in place, and many people don't, but if you've communicated and made pretty clear specifically what it is you would like to have done or not like to have done, or what your philosophy is on things, it can help to ease some of the stress when family members are called upon to make those decisions. Although it's often much better to have something in writing and written down, because memories fade and people feel guilty later on, and so those are the things you often deal with. But communication and discussion for everybody is important, and to get the whole family on the same page.
And I guess that would also go for if they're, if they are already seeing, maybe our viewers are already seeing some issues and they have some bumps along the road. In order to help prevent it from getting worse, what would you recommend to them?
Well, exactly that, that you've told multiple people. Like, as Amy said, there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of guilt involved. And if somebody feels like they're not doing everything to save a person's life, despite what that person may want or may have told one person, there may be a family member who says, no, we're just not going to let her die. We're not going to, as if, letting her die in a peaceful, lovely situation is a bad thing. But there's many people that feel very, very guilty and feel like they cannot agree to hospice because it feels like you're giving up. But as in your previous segment, when you said about when you reach milestones, like let's say you are childless, but you've just been married, but your parents still have a presence in your life. The husband and the parents may in fact be in conflict. It's not always a sibling conflict at all, and so you really need to tell multiple people and make sure that your particular wishes are respected throughout the generations.
One of the things I thought about too when you were saying that about the conflict and the faith issue, is the letting go. We as people of faith, we tend to believe that God is going to heal. I had this conversation with a person one day myself. I said, if God heals you 20 times, one day your healing going to be on the other side. That's where your eternal healing is going to come. And to try to get folk to realize that that's a conversation, even as pastors and lay leaders, we need to have now. That one day, it's been appointed for us to die. you know, so we might well get ready for the journey so it'll be a smoother transition. So.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I actually think we have a question from the audience, so let's go ahead and get that question if we can. Go ahead.
Well, this program, it's really in making my life more enriched. And I have many questions, and I had gotten a lot of information that is making me very happy. But this living, the end of living, it may sound negative, but I'm really thinking about continuing to live with dignity as we age. And I just would like, how can I just get all the information that I need to do this?
Well, I think it's a very good question. We've been talking about end of life, but how to prepare so that you're living your life with dignity and preparing and planning. What would you recommend?
Well, I think we always talk about diet and exercise. You know, we always talk. But what if you have a injury? You can't exercise like you used to. You know, you have other health issues. You can't eat this. You can't eat that. You have to come to a place of peace. You know, I've been here X amount of years, and my life is wholesome. I've had a good life, and I'm coming to the end of my journey. But I'm gonna live it to the fullest as long as I can. I'm going to the mall. I'm gonna take me a walk. I'm gonna holler at the children when they walk down the road. I'm gonna live it to the fullest, and that's how you live in dignity to me. You know, you live it to the fullest.
I think one of the things that I would recommend, the Conversation Project has got wonderful resources. If you have access to a computer or someone that can help you get online, or even calling the facility, they have all sorts of resources and links and information about how you start the conversation, things to think about. They have a starter kit where it poses questions for you to answer yourself with respect to what would you want in this circumstance, how much care would you want, and it sort of solidifies for you maybe some of the thoughts that you haven't really been able to articulate very well, or it gels together some of those things. And then the next part is really to start having that conversation with family and friends. And again, that the Conversation Project does talk about that and deal with that. And if you're having a difficult time figuring out how to start that conversation, you're not comfortable with it, or your family's not comfortable with it, or perhaps there's, you know, cultural reasons that people put their heads in the sand, you can speak to a clergy that you're comfortable with, or a nurse or friend to help with that. I'm a mediator. I oftentimes sit with families to start the conversation. My goal is not to come up with the solution. That's really for the family to do, but to start the conversation so that they can constructively come to make a plan and talk about it. And the last three people that I have personally worked with, when they finally got all of the documents and had their wishes memorialized, they expressed to me that they felt like a huge burden had been raised from their chest, that they felt very calm and at peace. And then you proceed on with life, and you sort of have in your mind what it is that you would want. And I know I'm taking up a lot of time, but the one last thing I would say is that it's a conversation that needs to be had more than once and over time, because your experiences in your day-to-day life and what you see with friends may change how you want to have things done as you proceed on your journey. So those things can always be changed. Documents are living organisms, and they're not set in stone.
Well, this is great information, talking about family dynamics and the importance of having the conversation many, many times. Amy, you are going to be with us for the third segment. Reverend Williams and Gloria, how can people reach you, Reverend?
Well, I'm at Orlando Health. You can call Orlando Health, ask the Chaplain Williams. You can call Ward Chapel. The numbers are in the phone book. We have a website. We're on 160 Pennsylvania Avenue, Winter Park. Just stop by anytime.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Gloria, how could people reach you?
And my phone that I have with me all the time is area code 407-415-8682.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And when we come back, we will take a look at moving from the family dynamic into having the conversation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Vital Living Forum on encouraging end-of-life conversations. This is the second in a two-part series focused on improving patient care. And one of the most effective ways of improving your end-of-life care is by documenting your wishes. In this third and final segment, we will walk through the process of doing just that. I'm Katie Dagenet, and with me are Amy Engert, Sally Kopke, and Kate DeBartolo. Kate and Amy, welcome back to this segment. And Sally, thank you for joining us. Sally Kopke is a community liaison for Vitas Healthcare, working with the faith-based community. She is a specialist in grief and end-of-life care, offering educational components on any aspect of death, dying, and bereavement. In addition to her outreach with Vitas, she also serves as the president of the Collaborative for End-of-Life and Grief Education and is a member of the steering committee for the Conversation Project. Well, let's go ahead and start with that. Let's start with the Conversation Project. And Kate, as we talked about in our last segment, the Conversation Project is very, very interesting. So refresh everyone's memory on what this is and what it's doing in terms of getting the conversation going.
Sure. So the Conversation Project is a public engagement initiative to try to get everyone's end-of-life wishes both expressed and respected. So we provide a lot of tools for individuals on our website to help people think through the conversations so that they can be having these conversations early and often and hopefully around the kitchen table and not in the ICU.
All right, so let's talk about the prep work for this because obviously this is something that's a conversation we've talked about already in this show about the importance of having the conversation more than once. So Amy, what is some of the prep work that folks can do to start the conversation of many?
Well, I'm sure Katie has some ideas as well, but I think in preparation for having that discussion, you should kind of be clear in your own mind about what you would want for your own end-of-life care and treatment and how strongly you feel about that. If it's for somebody else to having the conversation with an elder person that you need to have the conversation with, it's important to have that, I think, that prep work done in terms of the questions you want to answer, how you're going to make those introductions, and then also having financial documents, knowing if there are any documents that are already been drafted so that you can take a look at those, thinking who you might think would be your best voice for your financial decisions, your healthcare decisions, who is going to be able to stand up and really be your voice in those very difficult circumstances and situations. So that would be some prep work I would suggest.
And Sally, what would you say is an ideal way to start the conversation?
Well, for me, I needed a catalyst. My mom was the planner, and she guided and directed us, and she had a peaceful death. So for me, Mom was my catalyst in having the conversation. For my husband, it was the diagnosis and a very positive prognosis. So when we had our conversation, it was over dinner. Actually, it was serving dessert and coffee with our adult children and spouses, and each one of us had our own conversation on what we wanted at end of life. And it was comfortable, and everyone was in agreement.
Well, I was just going to add to that I think it's so important to remember that death is not just a medical experience, it is a human experience. And
That's a great way to put it.
Focusing, thinking through what matters to you and not just what's the matter with you is really important. And hopefully some of the tools of the Conversation Project that help people think through what their values might be. Are you more concerned about too little care or too much care? Kind of where do you fall on the spectrum? It helps you think through some of those questions in case you're not sure what it is you should be talking about. But yeah, I love the idea of over dinner or dessert and with loved ones, and it doesn't just have to be very medical in nature.
And who all needs to be involved in that conversation? I mean, I know you mentioned children and their spouses, but maybe thinking even beyond immediate family members, who all needs to be in part of those conversations that you're going to have?
I think as many people as you can have that you feel comfortable talking to should be involved in that conversation. The more people that know about it, the more people that know what your wishes are, the more likely your wishes are going to be granted. But I think immediately it should be certainly family, close family that are going to be involved in your care. If you have a close friend, if there's clergy or an attorney, whoever it might be that would be your voice and you want them to really stand up and help make sure that those wishes are granted, they need to be part of that conversation as well.
I would say too, we often hear from some folks where their closest family member may not live nearby. And so making sure you've also had the conversation with somebody local. So if somebody quickly has to make decisions for you, that can be very helpful. And hopefully by talking about this with more and more people, you spur the idea for them that they should be having these conversations themselves as well. So help spread the word.
Conversations will lead to more conversations. So let's now take it a step further. How do we go from the conversation or conversations to actually documenting? How would you recommend that be done? Amy?
There are really several ways to do it. Obviously, the informal way is to have the conversation, but to memorialize the conversation, I think, is an important second step. In my opinion, that really is even the first step. There's a document called the 5 Wishes, which asks people, there are 5 areas that it covers, and you fill it out, and it covers things like how much care would you want, who would you want to be your voice. It is signed, notarized. It is a legal document that is recognized in almost all the states in the United States. And then there are the traditional advance directives, having a living will executed, having a healthcare surrogate named, and having a healthcare proxy document executed. Those are all very important. A pre-need guardianship document can also be executed, but then making sure that those documents also are brought to the hospital and passed out to all the people that are going to need to be involved in your care.
And with all these documents, I know that as people listen, they're probably thinking, "Oh my gosh, how do I even begin to gather those?" Is an elder care law attorney, is somebody like that needed?
It is not needed for the typical advance directives. Hospitals have them. The Conversation Project will direct you to many resources that they have. You can go online and find them. An elder law attorney is helpful. I think that they can point out a lot of things that you need to think about, conflicts that might arise as you're considering who you want to be your voice, and the things that you need to think about from a legal standpoint. It helps, but it certainly is not necessary. I think people can even write it down on a piece of paper as long as it's signed and witnessed and documented. But there are many different ways of getting it done.
Sally, let me ask you, who needs to be involved after a loved one's wishes have been documented? So who needs to be still involved in that process? Because it is on paper, but people still need to know and be engaged.
What I feel is so important is having a very personal conversation with our healthcare surrogate, with our proxy, where we really are on the same page, where there is that level of comfort and respect, knowing that my wishes will be honored at the time, and continuing those conversations. I think that's first and foremost, having that advocate and the understanding.
One thing that I would add to that is that I may have in my mind who I want my proxy to be, and in having the conversation, they may not actually feel comfortable honoring some of those wishes. And so making sure that the person you've identified also feels comfortable doing that, and if they don't, decide whether or not you want to ask somebody else to do it, or if maybe what your wish is, I want my daughter to feel comfortable with whatever decisions she has to make. That's what matters most to me. But being sure that whoever you've designated feels comfortable doing that is important.
And I imagine there definitely can be problems that arise if people don't feel comfortable or if the wishes are not carried out. What have you seen, Sally?
Well, the conflicts can be horrific. It seems like we all know what is best for someone else. So that leads us back to making sure the conversation is not only with immediate family, but anyone who will be that support system.
And in terms of the wishes, we've talked about the importance of the healthcare surrogate. What about the primary care physician or the specialist who the elderly trust and know? How important is it to share it with them as well?
I think that's extremely important, to make sure that the healthcare community knows. But oftentimes things can happen, and they happen without planning. You can give it to your primary care physician and end up being in an emergency room, and you never see your primary care physician. And I will share one circumstance. I had helped one of my friends and drafted the documents that she needed for her dad, who was 90. He had made very clear, they had had a conversation, that he never wanted to go to a nursing home, and that he didn't want extraordinary care, and he was very specific in how he wanted to have that done. We drafted up the documents, she had them all executed, everything was signed, and a week later, He was on a walk, he fell and hit his head and ended up in an emergency room. And my friend had an experience with the physician who wanted to do all kinds of procedures and things that she did not want to have done, because after her conversation with that physician realized there was a good possibility he would end up in a nursing home and he would never get back to the same mental ability that he was. And she knew already what her dad's wishes were. And having that document made a huge difference. She was able to, for lack of a better word, fire her physician, put her dad up in a hospice unit in that hospital, and within 24 hours he passed away, but he passed away with all of her family knowing that they had honored his wishes. And she felt very grateful to have had that opportunity and not to have done something that she knew her dad really adamantly did not want to have done.
And that's an excellent example. You said she had the document with her. So how can folks make sure that their wishes are going to be honored? Let's say they're traveling. You never know when something might happen. What would you recommend?
I just discovered recently that the American Bar Association has an app. There is an app for that that you can download. It's My Healthcare Decisions, and it allows you to upload your documents right to your smartphone.
Okay.
So there's, as far as hacking and worrying about things being, accessed in the cloud, or it's carried right on your phone, and there's a card that you can carry in your wallet that says that you have your healthcare decisions on your phone, or you can have them uploaded to your healthcare proxy's telephone.
Okay.
And they use the example that you could have, if it's your son or your daughter that is going to be the proxy, they would have their name would be on the card to contact them, and they would be able to email those documents right to the facility, which is a great thing.
That's fantastic. Kate?
One thing that I would note is that rules do change state by state, and your wishes may or may not be as easily accessed or honored in other states. And so I think if you're going on a big trip, or you're going to be visiting someone, it's just all the more reason to be speaking with others or carry your document around with you.
All right. Conversations. Yes. Well, we have a question from the audience. Go right ahead.
Hi, and thank you for this opportunity. My question is, what if the loved one's wish that the loved one wants carried out, the family is in so much grief that they cannot, number one, pull themselves together emotionally to carry it out, and then financially. And if I can be just a little bit more specific, are there grants, are there scholarships through VITAS that are available? In this scenario, the loved one wants to transition from home. However, in the course of living, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's with some episodes of dementia. And so the family is having a really, really hard time bearing with this and place the loved one in a nursing home. And now the guilt, the shame, everything has intensified. And the loved one is actually still here over greater than 1 year. My second question to that, is there a way to transition the loved one from the nursing home back into the home as part of that care if there's no funding available to help with the medical costs and the things that usually happen during this time?
So I guess I would have a couple of answers. One, to the first question of what do you do if you can't honor what the wishes were? And I know I had the conversation with my husband, and I chose what my answers might be. But one of the things I said is, if the scenario that presents itself with me, assuming it's probably going to be an emergency or something unexpected, if you aren't able to honor these wishes, if I'm in a car accident or something where you can't follow it, I don't want you to feel guilty that you couldn't do it. So sometimes there's a little bit of giving permission for, we don't know what the scenario is going to be. I think to your other, where we often hear that people want to die at home or with their loved ones, and home isn't always an option for everybody. It's either not always financially feasible or physically feasible. And so making sure you can unpack that a little bit to find out, what is it about home that was so important to this person? Is it, I don't really want to be hooked up to a lot of machines, or I'm worried that people won't come visit me, or I don't want to be in pain. So finding out a little bit more about that, so even if the patient has to be in another setting, you can still feel comfortable that you're providing what it is they would have wanted in another area.
All right. Well, Amy, Sally, and Kate, thank you very much for being with us. Let's go ahead and start with you, Amy. How can folks reach you?
I can be reached at eldercollaboration@icloud.com.
Very good. Sally?
I can be reached through Vitas Healthcare, 407-875-0028, but also the Local Conversation Project, which has a website, and I believe the number will be posted, and we have a program coordinator who is coordinating education in the community.
Very good. Kate, how can folks reach you?
People can find the information about the Conversation Project at theconversationproject.org, and you can always ask to reach out to me. I can put you in touch with people here in Central Florida as well.
Very good. Well, thank you three for being with us for this show, and a special thank you to our studio audience for being with us for this entire show. It's been fantastic. And thank you for watching this Vital Living Forum on encouraging end-of-life conversations. After watching this show, I hope you have a better understanding of how talking before a medical crisis occurs can help you manage your medical care, but also create stronger family connections. This has been the second in a two-part series that explores how patient care is evolving to a more person-centered approach. The Vital Living Forum is part of Orange County's Vital Living block on Vision TV. And for more information, please visit us on the web at www.orangetvfl.net or contact the Orange County Office on Aging at 407-836-6563. I'm Katie Dagenet, and thank you for joining us.